That was cut off a bit short. Sorry about that. My husband has just got home from a business trip and called me. There you go. I have finished that first round or row now, and I have turned around and I am just going to do garter stitch. I normally do about 6 rows of garter stitch and then I cast off, and that will be what you have at the end of it. What you need to have when you're done is a decent frame for your bonnet's flap to be buttoned down on. So I find together with that cast on row, that 5 or 6 rows you can decide, and then cast off, and we'll be back. I have now finished the garter stitch rows. I landed up doing 6 rows, as you can see. I think the 6th row was my cast off row. Done that, and it's now created this hole. So we're going to now pick up these stitches here for the flap. There's only one additional thing that I like to do here, and that is casting on a couple of extra stitches. It's not a couple, it's 3, so that's not a couple, is it? I'm going to just use my crochet hook and go through right underneath the first stitch on the hook, and I'm going to pull my yarn through and do a knot so it can be nicely secured before we start. Okay, I'm going to pull that through. I'm just going to tie a gentle knot there. I can tie in that tail, not tie in the tail, I can weave in that tail later on. I'm now going to go back to my double pointed needles, and I've got my right side facing of my flap. I've got the knit side facing. Let's try and knit with the actual yarn and not the tail by mistake. So what I do is I cast on 3 stitches by knitting in the front of the first stitch and the back of the first stitch. So I've now got 2 stitches there, and I do that on the next 2 stitches as well. So I've increased by 3 stitches, knit into the front and knit into the back of that stitch, knit into the front and knit into the back of the same stitch. Then I finish off the row until the last 3 stitches. Oh my goodness, these double pointed needles are hooking in my electric blanket. So I'm knitting across to the end. Oops. Last 3 stitches on my needle. I'm going to knit front and then knit back. If you're not familiar with any of these techniques, feel free to go on the internet and YouTube and all of the rest and find out how to do them, because there's multiple ways to do everything when it comes to knitting and crocheting. You can pick up stitches in between the 2 stitches. You can do knit into the front, knit into the back. And I have no doubt there are plenty of others. I've done that first row. Turn my work around. Because I like my bonnets to have a nice neat edge here, I don't want these to curl. What I do is I knit the first 3 stitches of every purl row as well. And what happens is, because I've cast on those extra stitches, my bonnet overlaps, the flap overlaps the hole a little bit, so you don't have a hole. If you didn't do that, it would still be okay, but your edges would butt up against each other rather than have a little overlap. And I just thought, you know, the warmer you can keep these babies, the better. So turn around, and I'm going to knit 3 and then purl to the end. When I get to 3 from the end, I'm going to finish purl, and I'm going to knit 3, so that I've got 3 knitted on each end of every purl row. then going to turn my work around and knit the next row. What happens next? Let me quickly just finish this. Sorry, I'll get my yarn round and knit these 3, 1, 2, 3, and ready to turn. Turn my work around and knit all the way back. How far I knit is generally until I get to this inside edge of the bonnet here, this row here. So I'll knit down as far as that, and then I'll change to garter stitch, and I'll do 2 rows of garter stitch before I start making the loops, and that will be the next video. So carry on doing stocking stitch until you get here. It's probably going to be about 10 rows, and don't forget on your purl rows to just do a knit on each side. You could do 2 stitches on each end which are knitted, or 3. It's absolutely your design choice. And of course, as you saw on that other bonnet, you could also do the entire thing here in garter stitch. I'll be back in a bit. Knitted all of my rows. You can see this is the wrong side where I've got my knit stitches on the purl row, and then I've got my stocking stitch up to here where I've started my garter stitch, and I've done 3 or 4 rows of garter stitch. I'm back on the right side of the work now. I'm going to do loops. At this point, if you want to, you can do buttonholes if you prefer. I just thought loops would probably be easier for nurses to actually get easily round a button. So what I do is I take the first stitch on my needle over here, and I slip it onto my crochet hook, and I push these ones back out of the way. And then I grab my yarn and I do a chain for 8 stitches, keeping that first one nice and tight so that it doesn't make strands. So I'm going to do 8 chain stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now I've got 8 chain, and I slip this stitch back onto my needle. So I've got a little bit of a loop now. Okay. What I do then, I get back to my knitting and I knit across this row, but I'm going to knit 2 together. So I'm knitting the first stitch of this little chain section and the next stitch on my needle together. So I'm going to land up with 1 stitch less on each end of the row. Just knit that, keep it nice and tight so it stays together nicely, and I knit across all the way to the other side. When I get to the other side, you can either finish the row, turn and repeat exactly what we've just done, or you can slip the last stitch onto your crochet hook before you work it, which is what I'm going to try here. So I've got the last stitch, I'm going to pop that onto my crochet hook. There you go. I'm going to use the yarn to do 8 chain. Do your chain nice and tight so that you've got a nice cord. All right, pop that stitch back onto my knitting needle, drop my crochet hook, turn my work around. Now you can see I've got a loop on this side as well, and the loop on this side is closed off. So we've got a little loop for a button instead of a buttonhole. So those are your options. In this one, I am going to, my apologies, I've just realized I hooked my yarn by mistake here. In fact, I have no idea what I did there, but I'm going to have to make a stitch quickly. Give me a second, guys, to just make a stitch out of this. Honestly, what have I done? Get that over. Hook my stitch back on my needle. And then, right, I'm back where I was. Going to knit the first 2 stitches together. Going to knit across the row. When I've knitted across the row, if I need an extra row of knit stitches for my garter stitch rows, I'm going to do another row back, and then final row will be casting off. So what I do is get to the end, I close the flap to see if the flap is big enough to cover the hole. Oh my word, Michelle, you're in too much of a hurry. Dropped another stitch. Okay, get to the end. I've now got a loop on each side of my row. There you go. And I'm going to now fold this over the bonnet like so and see if that covers the hole nicely. And it does. So I'm not going to do an extra row. I am going to simply cast off. And in this case, you can also cast off any way you like, but I do this old traditional method of knit 2 stitches, pass the first stitch over the second stitch, knit another stitch, pass the stitch that's left on the right hand side of the needle over the other one, and just keep doing that all the way across. So pass the one stitch over the other stitch, so you're dropping a stitch each time. Pass the one stitch over the other, knit another. You've got 2, pass one over, now you're back to having 1. Do that all the way to the end. When you get to the end, we are going to cut a thread, the thread or the yarn, and leave a little tail for us to sew into the work. And it's all tidy. No point leaving a very long tail for a button or anything, because of course the button is on the other half of the bonnet, the main part of the bonnet in this case. Very often, if I do have tails near where a button is going to be sewn on, I will leave a longer tail. I'm getting to the end. I've got 2 stitches left, and the last stitch will be left on the hook, or the needle in this case. So I make a little bit of a bigger loop, snip that off, and thread it back through here, and just give it a gentle tug. I will tighten it up and sew it in nicely later on. And there you have the flap of your bonnet. And your bonnet is basically just now needing 2 buttons. Make sure when you put the buttons on, you stretch this a little, and you put 1 on each side there. Most of the people that request these bonnets don't want ribbons on them, so we leave them without the ribbons. But if anybody did request ribbons on theirs, we could just tie one into, or stitch one to each corner where the chin is. And that, everybody, is how you make a little bonnet with a crocheted back and a knitted crown, I suppose, or the knitted top with a flap for the ventilator. Anybody who wants to make this for a baby that isn't in a NICU or in a ventilator can simply ignore this whole flap business here, and when you get to knitting these side pieces, you just simply go backward and forward until you get to here, and you do the garter stitch, and you're done. Much simpler, of course, because you don't have to leave a hole and create this band across the top here. I hope you've enjoyed that. Please let me know if there's any problems or you didn't understand any of the directions. not the best video. I just wanted to do something quick and easy for you to be able to follow along with. But it's a really lovely little bonnet for a baby. Enjoy!